Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. This week, I'm so pleased to share a fabulous chat with the amazing composer, musician, singer-songwriter, arranger, synth-pop pioneer, Hannah Peel. Not only is her own work an inspiring and ambitious blend of projects that will blow your musical mind, I'm talking about Mary Cassio, a 7-movement odyssey composed for analog synths and a full 29-piece colliery brass band, to her sublime electronic opus, Awake But Always Dreaming, which was an exploration of music's power to cut through dementia. She was part of the band The Magnetic North with Simon Tong and another man with plenty of Weller connections, Erland Cooper. She also added her orchestration skills to Paul Weller's incredible recent albums, True Meanings, On Sunset, and Fat Pop Volume 1. And who can forget that incredible gig at Royal Festival Hall in 2018 that turned into the magnificent Other Aspects album. Hannah is also one of the presenters of Radio 3's magnificent late evening show Night Tracks, which I highly recommend, and her soundtrack to the TV thriller The Deceived won the Music Producers Guild Prize for Best UK Original Score Recording of the Year 2021. She was nominated for an Emmy for her Game of Thrones The Last Watch score, and her brilliant new 2021 album Furwave was Mercury Music Prize nominated. In fact, at the time of recording, we were just days away from that awards ceremony too. So let's dig into it. A lady who's been very, very close to the work of Paul Weller for the past few years. My guest this week, Hannah Peel.
Hello.
I don't know where to start really, because singer-songwriter, composer, arranger, you seem to play every instrument on the planet, radio presenter, producer. I mean, there's literally no end to your amazing talents, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, I'm just a bit nuts, I think. I don't think I'm talented sometimes. I just think I just can't help doing music. It just seems to be non-stop. So
you love a project, don't you?
I love a project. I love the next thing. And, I guess that's one thing that I really enjoy about working with Weller is that he's just got it flowing out of him all the time. He's constantly in motion, constantly producing and making new things. And I find that really exciting. And I guess when you meet someone who's at his level and has been doing it for so long, it just inspires you to keep on going.
Because that would be really easy for a man like him in terms of the back catalogue to rest on his laurels and just dial it in. That must be a real inspiration to see somebody who's constantly kind of moving forward all the time and wanting to find out what's new, whether it's his own music or others. Isn't it?
Totally. It's very inspiring. And I guess one of the first things I've ever said about him is that his ability to keep moving forward and never sit back, because I think that's when people do become stale and they probably lose the passion and spark that keeps the next thing going. And his ability as well to find younger artists and embrace them and trust them. And I think that's a really, really magical thing. I guess he's in the position where if it doesn't work out, he can get somebody else. But I've just had such a wonderful experience working with him. And I really do hope it continues into the future.
Well, we'll talk about the trust, because I think that's, just incredible what you've done together over the past few years. So we're going to dig into the links with Paul over the past decade or so, and also this beautiful catalogue of music. And it's more than that, actually, it's projects. And I'm going to talk about that with you, because there's much more than just the albums that come from you and the singles and stuff. These are fully fleshed out things. They're beautiful. But first of all, have to understand, when was it that you first discovered the music of Paul Weller? Was it The Jam, The Style Council, or Weller solo?
Solo, actually. Yeah, when I went home from my first year of uni, I worked in a pub, and it was called the White Bear in Barnsley, and it was in the middle of a housing estate. I don't even know if it's still there or not, but it was an amazing little pub, like, a rough housing estate, and the kind where like the landlady would put dripping on white bread and chop it into triangles and leave it on the counter on the bar for everybody coming in from, the kind of workmen jobs would come in for a pint and then have the dripping. And there was always a bunch of characters, and they were so lovely. And one guy used to copy CDs and then give you the CDs for £1 and, print out the cover, and it would always have lines on the printer. But he had a big list. And so I asked him if I could have some Paul Weller, some of the solo stuff. So he gave me a couple of CDs, and that was the first time I'd listened to like You Do Something to Me and all those classic tracks. I think it was a live album. Yeah, and so I guess that just stuck with me. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. So actually when I met him, and then when we'd started doing the show for the South Bank, you know, at the Royal Festival Hall, that track, he wanted to do that track. So actually arranging that track and knowing it so well was like that was a really special moment. And I never told him that I've got a rip-off CD of his record.
Yeah. Has there come a point where you started paying full price for Paul's material? Or have you ever bought a Paul Weller album?
Well, I guess, I don't know. I guess when you look at the music industry now, I probably paid more for CDs than anyone does for any streaming service.
That's very true. I think I would have first discovered your music probably about 10 years ago. Would have been the album Broken Wave, which I think must have been about 10 years ago. And I have a feeling it would have been via a Weller link. And I don't know if you know this, because I don't know if there was a connection between you and Paul at that point. Probably not. He was always going on at that point about a band called Tongue. And I'd probably pronounced that wrong because there's two N's in it.
Yeah.
So you created this with Mike Lindsay, who was from that band. And at that point, Mike Lindsay had also remixed a track on Wake Up the Nation on the deluxe version. So there's a little connection there as well. Mike Lindsay's now in still in Tongue, but also in a duo with Laura Marling as well.
I know Mike very, very well, but I didn't know the Tongue connection at all.
Yeah, and he was always going on about that. And then, it was a Tongue remix for She Speaks from Wake Up the Nation. So, yeah, that first album would have been, like I say, 10 years ago. And then presumably it was Erland Cooper that introduced you to Paul.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And I remember seeing him in Erland and the Carnival, would again have probably been about 10 years ago, around about a similar time. And they supported Paul and, again, loved all his music. So the connection for you was what, the band The Magnetic North, I'm guessing, that you were in with Erland and with...
yeah, God, I didn't realise how like cyclical it all was because, yeah, obviously Mike Lindsay produced my first record, Mike Lindsay Tongue, now Lump. So we shared a studio in East London, and yeah, he made my very first record. And up until that point, I'd always been a session musician, or I'd kind of written for theatre or little bits of short film up in Liverpool. Yeah, and then when that record was being released and it was finished, I got the guy who ran my little label. He's called Static Caravan. He's like a tiny, he does it all from his kind of office in his house, but he is a scientist by day and then puts out these records on like 7-inch vinyl. So he'd put out like, I think, a first Erland and the Carnival. He'd put out the first kind of Tongue, Beth Jeans Houghton, who's De Blonde, like loads of different artists. And I was one of them. And then, so he actually asked Simon Tong, the guitarist, and Erland if they wanted to do a remix of one of my tracks. And through that, then I went and met them, and then I ended up supporting them on tour for like maybe 6 months. We went to Europe, we went around the UK. And then from that was when we started to build into... Simon and Erland had already kind of started the Magnetic North, but without giving it a name. They'd been to Orkney on a trip, and then they were looking for someone who could score and add vocals and stuff. And so I just became the natural third member. And then, yeah, we made the Magnetic North record. So yeah, I knew of them supporting Paul from the beginning because that was their biggest gig, and they became good friends with him. So yeah, that's exactly how I met him. Paul was looking for somebody to score, and Erland recommended me.
Now, and I would love to ask Erland the same question, because some of his projects are also like way out there. I mean, his latest one, he's recorded an album and then buried it in the middle of nowhere for nobody to be able to find. Yeah. It's insane. And you equally, these projects seem to arrive at you, from what I can work out, in terms of people kind of asking you to get involved in something or giving you an idea, and then suddenly they become these huge big things. But talk to me about where you get your ideas from. Where does the inspiration come from for these things?
yeah, they're always quite mad. Actually, Paul introduced me to Noel Gallagher, and we were going to do some... I was going to do some scoring for him. It didn't work out because of the pandemic and stuff. And he was asking me what I made. And I was like, I'll never forget it, because I was like, oh yeah, I've got quite a few records out. And I said, I've got this one with like colliery brass band and synthesizers, and they go into space. And he just kind of looked at me and went, why the fuck have you done that? and so I was just like, yeah, that's true. Like, why would you do a colliery brass band record and think that was what people might buy? But so yeah, there is always that element of like by chance, but I think, at the end of the day, it's always to do with story and storytelling, and there's always an element of wanting to convey something, no matter how like off kilter it is. with the concept or what kind of like instrumentation it is, there's always an element. And, you know, the Mary Cassio album was my opportunity to get a full 30-piece player band funded, find a way to record it. You know, it was one of those things that I wanted to use as I suppose in career aspects, I wanted to get out of being known as just a singer-songwriter, because I didn't ever feel like that, ever. I was so not a singer-songwriter. I mean, I really struggle with lyrics. And, you know, I used that album as a really kind of like, here is my instrumental record and proof that I can do that. And it kind of opened a lot of doors, especially for scoring and things. And that's what I do mostly, you know, like TV and film work. And I love orchestrating and strings. And yeah, I get a real buzz from all that. So it was so even though these records are like mad and they've always got a story behind them, there is always an intention as well.
And they're brilliant, I have to say. The album that you did, which would have just been before the Mary Cassio album, Awake But Always Dreaming, is a lovely album, I have to say, and makes me think, I'm going to well up now, makes me think of my nan who had dementia. And honestly, some of the stuff that you do from that is a beautiful thing, honestly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, even that record is a long journey in the making, and Erland actually helped co-produce that one as well. So we worked together for quite a long time. Then when he'd started doing his own solo stuff, we found we couldn't work together anymore in terms of like, he was too busy and I'm too busy. So, well, you are the busiest woman in rock and roll in a minute. We'll have to talk about that. But that album came about from you reading something about the positive effects of music on people with dementia. Was that right? And your own experience with your own grandmother. Would that be right? Yeah, totally. Like my experience of, you know, if anyone's ever experienced that in their family, you start to feel like you're losing touch with them and a connection. And I didn't know the power of what music could do. Like it's magical. Like when you experience playing somebody who doesn't remember your name or your father or where they are or who they were married to for 50 years, and then you play them a piece of music and they can sing it back to you lyric for lyric and also trigger memories of that time when they heard that track or a story they had with it. It's just like, I just was like, wow, music is fucking amazing. Like, it just was so, that totally inspired the record of like delving into another world and how the brain works. And, you know, I really went into the science of it and joined a kind of collective that were the Wellcome Collection in London that were researching brain neurons and developing arts and ideas to do with the science. And I just think it's a wonderful tool for people that are living with the disease. And that's what I mean about you fully immersing yourself into it's almost like I think you're like a method musician in a sense, whereby the Robert De Niro of the music world. I love that. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but definitely there is an element of that for sure. Yeah, you definitely dive in, I have to say. When would you have first met Paul then? Yeah, definitely through Erland, and he sent aspects from True Meaning and as a bit of a test, I think, and he just said, can you add some strings to this? And so I, at that time, was playing my violin a lot more. I'm not playing at all, really, sadly, at the moment. But so I layered up all the string arrangement on there and I did the strings and we layered them in the studio and Erland recorded it for me and built this quartet just out of my violin and sent that back to Paul. And he was just like, I love it. Can you do more? So then we ended up actually recording a quartet. And actually that's the one track on the record where my strings have stayed and we just added cello to the real cello to the bottom. So that was quite nice. And it just went from there, really. Yeah, and then it was never me that recorded after that. It was always with the string quartet, thankfully. But I think you're actually on a Paul Weller album before that. And I don't know if you know this. You might be due some royalties. Who knows? Was it a remix? Yeah, you're right. So A Kind Revolution, track number 1, Woosie Mama, opens the album with P.P. Arnold and Madeleine Bell on backing vocals. But the deluxe version has a remix, as they always do, and it's an Erland and the Carnival remix, and I think you did strings on it. It did. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Wow. And did you have any connection with Paul through that, or was that all through Erland? No, and he probably doesn't even know that. So. Let's talk about True Meanings. I've got it here. This is honestly, what an album. And Paul had
been planning this for such a long time, I gather.
I wasn't privy to that. I guess he probably was, if that's what you know. But I was more kind of brought in. The strings are always brought in more towards the end or the last 3/4 of a record. So I don't usually know the process behind it. And I guess our conversations as well are always so present. They're not about what has been happening. They're always just about how do we do that? What do we do? What's the ideas? Let's go do them. And that's always the conversations. And, you know, Paul's always amazing with music and always really amazing with like having a chat as well. Like, why aren't you married yet? Why aren't you doing this? Like, he's one for like gossip, that's for sure. So
nobody else has ever mentioned that on the podcast before.
He loves and he also thought I was about 24 or 25. And when I told him my actual age, he was like, no, wow, what? I can't believe it. I was like, no, it's true. So he probably thought he was getting a young prodigy and he wasn't.
I mean, the album is a beautiful thing, and we'll touch on some of that because I think we talked about trust earlier on. There's a huge amount of trust given to you, and how much? I mean, I'm guessing not loads of direction.
Yeah, he's very, very much just gives me clues to what he wants. He never really references other artists. He'll sometimes send a track through and go, "This is really great," but he'll never say, "I want anything like that." He'll just be like, "Listen to that, it's great." He always sends like little clips of like him playing guitar and like singing along, like humming along like a melody. So usually what I'll do is I'll just pick that out and then add it to the score and then send it back. And there usually is a little bit of back and forth in terms of like, maybe that's a bit too much, or maybe we need more here, or can we have something in the middle eight? But that I mean, it's pretty quick. Yeah, the actual structure of things. So, but I guess, you know, when you're in a room with someone, I don't think I've done it remotely ever. I think I've always gone down there and we've played the record in the room, and you always get that vibe anyway. As soon as you're in the room with the artist, you kind of know what's to come, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
when you get that first play of the Soul Searchers and Old Castles, and actually I'll come back to Old Castles because that's an interesting one, because you worked with Andy Croft on that, who's a bit of an arranger at times as well. But songs like Bowie and Wishing Well and Moving On and all that, when you hear those for the first time in that environment in Blackburn, presumably on the big speakers, as everybody keeps talking to me about, what's that like?
Oh, it's so exciting because everything always sounds amazing. And also like just hearing those tracks for the first time is always a real pleasure because they've been worked up by the rest of the band. So I always get to go in and hear it with the drums and the bass, and maybe sometimes it's a rough vocal or maybe it's a rough drum take and they're going to redo stuff, but generally I get to feel the vibe of it with everything on it already. So you do get a sense of excitement and everybody listening, and yeah, it's really good. There's always a door open to the outside and there's like chickens on the other side of the wall and stuff like that. It's really, you can always hear them, or the Cockrell. Good vibes.
I think the Cockrell's credited on the album 22 Dreams, if I remember rightly. There's actually a credit for the... Yeah. It's actually on there. And it must have been great to see Erland Cooper, your friend, writing lyrics as well. So Bowie, Wishing Well and White Horses. And he did backing vocals on a couple of the songs as well. But writing lyrics for Paul, which nobody writes lyrics for Paul, do they?
No, I think it was definitely a dream come true for Erland. So it's... he did do quite a few co-writes on that record. So I think it was definitely a thing that he was wanting to do and explore. And it's amazing that Erland did that with him, because Erland, like, even though he's gone and done very instrumental records now, you know, his songwriting skills and the way he writes lyrics is brilliant. He's so quick and fluent with it. So it was always the thing that I really adored about working with him, was always just like he would come up with things very quickly. And so I can see why like he got on really well with Paul, and they did a couple together. So on True Meanings, I think I'm right in saying the string section you brought in was Demon Strings, was that right? Best known for being like the in-house band for Damon Albarn and Gorillaz, I think, more often than not, but a lot of his projects as well. So had you worked with them before? Were they a recommendation, or how did that come about? Yeah, I loved them. They were So Simon Tong, in Magnetic North, he was in Gorillaz and in The Good and the Bad and the Queen with Damon, and they always use the Demon strings. So I became really, really good friends with the girls that play. And yeah, as soon as this came up, I was like, do you want to come and do this? And then, equally, Paul has totally fallen in love with them. And I don't know if they're actually working as the same quartet anymore, but we still try and get them all together just as a treat. Because he's just like, I want them in there. Because I guess one of the nice things is that you always see the friendly faces and the people that you've worked with before. And especially this last record, being done in a pandemic, it feels like you need to honour your friends and work with your friends, because everybody had such a hard time.
Yeah, absolutely. What is it that you brought to that LP, do you feel? And what is it? Because for me, it's like these beautiful, like, intricate layers that are kind of coming in and out of the record and adding to. I mean, Paul had talked about doing an acoustic album for a while, and Gravity, I know, was a track that had been kicking about for like 5-7 years. He's talked about, but Aspects has come up a lot on this podcast as being a real favourite of people, from a 40-year back catalogue of being a real favourite for people. But what was it that you felt you could add to it and bring to that project? Oh
wow, I guess. For me, it was very much a first-time experience working with Paul. So there's definitely a delicacy, and also a kind of freedom in experimentation as well, like some of the melody lines and the arrangements. And, out of everything, I adore working with string in the format of this record. Like, it's amazing doing like on Sunset and Fat Pop and stuff. But for me, you can really get the detail of the cello and the viola and the melody lines and the interweaving kind of things when it's stripped back, because that's when it's heard. Whereas when you've got the drums and everything else, and you lose the melody lines that are in the bottom, because that's just the way it has to be with the mix and stuff. So this record is very special to me in that sense. And there's a real honesty and sincerity anyway to the songs. So all I had to do was kind of work with that and the lyrics that Paul presented me with.
Now I'm going to take you back to October 2018, this beauty here. Oh, yeah. Remember that? The London Royal Festival Hall. I was there on the second night, and this beautiful concert has been captured with that live. I'm holding up the live album. You can't see this, podcast listeners, but holding up the live double album, Other Aspects. And you conducted and wrote all the orchestral arrangements for these two shows. This was London Metropolitan Orchestra this time round. Was that right?
Yeah.
And joined by Phil Veacock's horn section as well. And I mean, wow. I know I'm embarrassing you a little, but... I mean, what a bloody brilliant piece of work, honestly. The concert itself was fabulous, but the live album is great.
Oh, yeah, I loved that. It was so good.
How did you know that was going to be a live show? Was that early on, that conversation, or?
No, it was after. I think Paul and all the team knew that it was going to be a live show and it was going to be in London, but I think I was definitely under the test for the record. And so when that all went well and we all got on really, really well, he was like, well, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, great. But I never considered conducting it. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'll do the arrangements, but I'm not conducting. That's, I'm not a conductor. And I never have done. Like, I would be like maybe in sessions, but not like ever on stage. So there was definitely an element of me saying, yeah, I'll score it, but we'll get somebody else and we'll think about that and do stuff. And yeah, like the usual string players, Antonio and Kotz, they're all interweaved within the London Met Orchestra. So that was quite important, to find an orchestra that would allow us to have our own players as well. And also to find an orchestra that would allow, in the end, me to conduct, because generally most orchestras come with their leader and who they work with, and to work with a leader that has never really done it before as well.
How did you get your arms twisted for that then?
He's very persuasive, Paul, isn't he? So like I just, and I guess Erland was involved and he was just like, look, just do it. You got nothing to lose. And then I spoke to somebody who's a friend who's a really amazing conductor. And I said, look, what should I do? And he was like, well, you've got all the drums, you've got everything there. Don't worry about it. Like, you're just generally there to bring in people. And then once I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, I actually don't need to control the tempo or anything. I'm just there as a kind of facilitator and a in between. So that's how I approached it. And then that meant that, and then on the live show, as you know, know that I could have a really good time and have a bit of a dance as well. So.
Yeah, you were enjoying it. You definitely were enjoying it. I was watching the film back the other day because there's a DVD that comes with it. It was on Sky as well, which we've got recorded on the box and watched regularly. But I want to ask you a few questions about it. So one, how do you pick a set list for this and pick those songs that are going to work? So we had songs from A Kind Revolution. We talked about True Meanings, but there was, the Jam, the Style Council, well as earlier solo material. So I'm going to list some of the songs because people might not know, but things like One Bright Star from 22 Dreams kicks it off, which I love. And it's almost added like a kind of waltz to it, hasn't it? But Jam songs like Boy About Town and Private Hell and Tales from the Riverbank, which just sounds so different with an orchestra. It's just amazing. And then the Style Council, we get Have You Ever Had It Blue, A Man, A Great Promise, and solo songs like Strange Museum, which I haven't, which was probably on that dodgy CD you got back in the day, right? But I hadn't heard that live for about 20 years, and Country and Wildwood. How do you pick a set list from that? And how much of it was a collaboration between you and Paul picking the songs, or you going, actually, I think this could work? How did it work?
No, I mean, that was definitely him. I didn't have any. Well, I guess there was an element of talking through what could work and the instrumentation, but the set list definitely came from him and his producers and the management. Like I was not privy to that. So there was always talk within that of the set list of what would be more brass, what would be led by the strings, or what would be the woodwind. So that there was always like a real collaboration in that respect. And the rehearsals for that had to be separate. So we had to do kind of rehearsals separately so that I could actually hear the recordings, how they were going to be when they were performed. So they had to then rehearse together as a band, then send me that. And then I went to another rehearsal with them and sat and scored as they were rehearsing. So because a lot of it was to do with timings and how it would work, because a lot of it would be different to the recording, because they've obviously the band have played live on stage those songs and worked them into different ways. So I guess that was the one challenge, was us all working together so that if I write an extra 4 bars, the band have to play extra 4 bars. But I guess one of the things that actually came out of that, in that sense, the kind of more logical side of it, was the fact that, when we were on stage, by that point, I knew the songs so well that if there was a verse missing or there was something cut quickly, the band react to that, but it was good, because then I would be like to the orchestra, right, we're going from B, and I'd indicate we were going from B, and then so that was a really fun thing to do, and it kept everybody on their toes. But the set list, that definitely came from Paul. There's
a lovely clip which I don't know if you've watched the documentary, because sometimes people don't like watching themselves, and you've not watched it. There's a lovely clip of Steve Craddock in the documentary talking about how difficult it was, because like you say, this is very different to their normal way of working, and saying it was a huge learning curve. And Andy Croft, I think, is talking about how you have to stick to the arrangement. Like you say, it's not like Paul, I think, is talking about you can make mistakes usually in a live gig, you can cover them up and whatever, but this is a very, very different experience for them. And they found it a bit terrifying at times. I mean, that sounds like that might have been your experience as well as a first-time conductor. But did you see that from the band of like, actually, this is them having to step out of their comfort zone?
Yeah, definitely. But wow, when I think back to it, I love the experience, because we were all in it together. In some ways, I think maybe they looked to me to give them a lot of answers, and I was just looking to them. So it was a very collaborative performance in that respect. And Paul works with the most loveliest people, as you've probably experienced. Every single one of those band members is very lovely and honest and great to work with, and it's such a gorgeous family of people, and I was just brought into that world and embraced and had a laugh, and loved it. And it was great. And also the brass section under Phil Veacock is unbelievable and fabulous, and Phil was really, really helpful for me as well, because scoring a concert of that size and then thinking about all the prep in order to do the live performance was mammoth. Like, it was a massive thing. So actually Phil was really helpful in just like giving me little bits of brass parts that he already had from records and things like that. So it was a really big collaborative show in the end.
Presumably you didn't have loads of time to work on that, did you?
I had a schedule on my wall, and it was a track a day in September. So it'd be like, if I didn't do a track on one day, I'd have to do 2 on the next day. So it was a real tight turnaround.
You don't want that building up suddenly like, shit, I've got 5 tracks to do in one day. Damn it. And that must be a bit about what they're going through at the moment to get to this live concerts in November. How do you pick tracks from 3 albums, and all the back catalogue? Must be impossible. So you mentioned the band, and I said I'd come back to Andy Croft, who's clearly a massive talent, not least with the Moons, but his work with Paul as well. And he arranged the strings on the track Gravity, but also you get a co-credit together on Old Castles, which is another real standout song. So how did that string arrangement work with the two of you together?
He was great because he had some of the arrangements, they were kind of scored in a way that didn't really fit the quartet when we were recording. So all I did really was neaten everything up and then suggest kind of voicings of different things. So it was a really lovely process. I mean, he's a really great, fantastic musician. So it was great to work with him and do that. And I'm not precious about, oh, it has to be my arrangement, or he wasn't precious about it. You know, he was very much like, just take what you want from it and make it better. so that's what we came up with. So it was fun. That was really fun to do.
Brilliant. I'm going to divert away from Weller for a second to talk about what came between that project and On Sunset, which was two amazing pieces of work from you, an Emmy nomination, Game of Thrones. If anybody's seen the documentary I think it must have been for the final series, it was The Last Watch, wasn't it? With the night shoots and all that stuff. You created the soundtrack for that. I love the opening with the music box as well. If you haven't heard the music box version of the Game of Thrones theme tune, then you haven't lived, quite frankly. But you build those music boxes yourself, don't you?
I do, yeah. Yeah, I do. I've got a bit lazy in the last few years in that I don't want to sit and punch holes for hours on end. So I try and get out of using the music box now. But yeah, I mean, I've got like a whole box, reels and reels and reels of paper with holes in that I've sat and, you know, spent days over. But yeah, actually, you know, I was when we were preparing for that Other Aspects live album and the shows, I was scoring for Game of Thrones at that point. So that it was a lot of doubling up. So in the summer before, like that, you know, I started kind of doing the Weller stuff very full on in the September, but I had to kind of pre-compose everything else so that I could have September off to kind of do that. So it was a lot of work. But I've got used to it.
Yeah, you know, you're constantly spinning plates. And then we had Deceived, which was this 4-part series on Channel 5, which is now on Netflix, I noticed the other day, which is great. So yeah, it's this really good, like, bingeable drama series, this psychological thriller. It's got twists and turns. It's got a spooky house. It's got all kinds of things going on. And again, when I talk about your stuff being so much more than just music, I don't mean that, but you know what I mean. Didn't you record the sound of the creepy house to influence the music? Was that right?
Yeah. So The Deceived was my first TV show. And yeah, it was set in a house, and actually, lucky enough, it was in Northern Ireland, which is where I'm based. And so I got the chance to go on set and record as much kind of field recordings of the house as possible, whether it be like this amazingly creepy door that had this sub bass to it when you creaked it really, really slow, to like, you know, one of the rooms had tons of medals in. So I just, you know, like sounds of the medals going up and down and incredible amount of crystal cut glass. And so I sampled a lot of those and made my own instruments out of those sounds. And actually the score itself was supposed to be more of that atmospheric, you know, tension driven kind of score. But actually when it then came to the edit and when the director and the showrunners and everybody were in there, it was much more hands-on, and they wanted, you know, like kind of Bernard Herrmann-esque strings, and the references were just completely crazy. So yeah, so it changed very dramatically and very quickly to what it is now.
Well, brilliant. And again, winning awards. And when we talk about awards, we have to talk about your Mercury Music Prize shortlisted album. Your latest 2021 saw the release of Furwave, which is just, I mean, the album for lockdown, I have to say, because it's so atmospheric. I don't know when you started doing it, presumably in lockdown 1 back in, you know, last year, because it feels like you were kind of embracing nature at the same point that nature was returning to our cities and our towns as everybody was locked down at home. But talk to me about Furwave, because it's a brilliant project, but B, an absolutely beautiful album. It's a lovely listen.
Oh, thank you so much. Do you know that record's got a really weird journey? The record itself was finished in the beginning of lockdown. So I finished The Deceived, and as soon as The Deceived finished, in fact, we finished The Deceived, the recording and the mixing, once lockdown had hit. So I had to do everything remotely in the end, which was really sad because I couldn't record the strings, and, you know, I had to send it all to them to be individually recorded. So it was quite a mission. So when I finished that, I kind of wanted to readdress quite a lot of other things that I had. So I already had Furwave, but in a different format. Like, it wasn't the record that you have now. It was originally written as and commissioned really as a library record by a really amazing library called KPM, the KPM series, and many artists have done library records, mostly under pseudonyms, usually if they want to try out a different style or they just want to do something that's different from their normal, what their recording artist thing is. EMI actually own KPM now, and they came to me and were like, why don't you take this 70s record from 1972, a Delia Derbyshire radiophonic workshop record, and rework it into a modern day electrosonic? And they left me to it for like a year, and I came back with like kind of 7 or 8 tracks and said, right, this is what it is. And same again, like The Deceived, what I'd done was, because I felt like it was too precious to just sample, like say a section and then put that into a track. And also it's really hard because it's such an unusual album, electrosonic. It's like, it's way off the wall and it's very like out there. I don't know. I just didn't see how I was ever going to be able to approach it. So I just basically took tiny little fragments and made my own instruments out of those original tape recordings, and then just completely forgot about it and made a completely different record and kind of pitched it back to the library, and it sat with them for quite a while. And they came back and were like, look, if you ever want to release this, just let us know. It's a really good record. So when lockdown hit and that Easter period of everybody kind of waking up to birdsong all the time and like going out for walks once a day and appreciating everything that was around them when you have the silence, that was when I was like, okay, this is Furwave. Like, I need to really reapproach some of these tracks. I got a lovely friend in Bristol called Tim Allen, who works with loads of different people, but mostly like Bats for Lashes, and said, look, can you remix the whole record? It needs mixing for release, and also can you put some beats down on these 2 tracks, because I've totally can't see the wood for the trees, more or less, which is ironic because it's called Furwave. But, and he came back with like Emergence in Nature, and I was like, yeah, that's it. Well, that's the feeling of like, I want to be able to dance to this when we're stuck inside our houses. And at that time I was kind of like, well, you know, when we leave in the summer, we're not going to be in lockdown and everybody will want to have something to celebrate. So that was the kind of thinking definitely behind the connection to nature and the history of the record. But, you know, the reality is it didn't come out until March this year, 2021. And then also I didn't really expect it to do as well as it has done. It was just supposed to be a small kind of release. It was more just to kind of tie me over and stop me overthinking things and just be like, oh, great, we'll put out that little electronic record and that'll be it.
And here we are, Mercury Prize nomination later. I mean, the reviews, you might have closed your ears, but the stroke of genius, a gorgeous fizzing record, more powerful than lyrics. Each track communicates its own panorama, and sheer sonic beauty are just some of the words that have been written about this beautiful album. But I think I read a really cool article. I can't remember what it was now. It might have been The Guardian. They were talking about the power of albums without lyrics in lockdown and how important instrumental albums have been over the past kind of 12 months and stuff. And there's something, I don't know what your view is on that, but there's something about that, definitely, isn't there?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, is it because we were subject to so much noise and news and constant reporting? And there's definitely like, I definitely I got halfway through 2020 and I had to turn off any news kind of channels that I had on any kind of social media or anything, because I couldn't cope with any more talking about stuff. You know, I guess when you look at the Mercury Music Prize and the list of the albums on there, there's like a third which is instrumental, which is the first time ever that's ever been like that. So I guess there is a movement towards that type of music in the lives that we are leading in the 2020s and onwards. So yeah, it's really amazing that actually like it kind of touched a lot of people and allowed a lot of people to kind of, I guess, float away with it while we were going through a lot of things. Yeah, there's something lovely about just plugging into your ears and being lost in the moment and lost in your own thoughts whilst you can kind of sit and listen, which is brilliant. And you must be so happy about how that's gone and the reviews and the results and everything from that must have been so nice. God, yeah. I mean, it was kind of like one of those things, though, like, I'll be honest, where you go, why wasn't this a record that like was like one that I was already touring, or one that like cost an absolute fortune, like the brass band one? Or why does it have to be this one that I'm never going to perform live and I never wanted to like do much with? We only pressed up like 500 vinyl to begin with, and I think we've done 2,500 now, and it's like, how is that even like possible? It's always that way, isn't it? It's always what you don't expect.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. But aren't you performing some of it live at the Mercury Prize? Is it next week?
They gave me the option of like, well, you could do it on your own and play it on your own. It would be simple. And I was just like, I don't want to do this on my own. I want to see my friends and I want to have a bit of a dance, because we're doing the Emergence in Nature track, and that's a big track to do just on your own. And, you know, it's got a big, massive brass and woodwind section halfway through it that comes pumping in, and you can't do that on your own. So yeah, I've got a couple of friends that are going to help, and I can't wait to just like have a laugh on stage and just enjoy the moment for what it is. Because, you know, I don't know, the records I make are very odd sometimes, and I just don't think, you just don't know when you might have that opportunity ever again.
Celebrate the moment whilst you're in it, and who knows what the future holds. Yeah. And I'm sure it's going to be a really exciting future. We'll talk about what you're working on next in a sec. But On Sunset, Fat Pop, 2 albums from Paul in the past, year and a bit, 18 months, something like that. On Sunset, you were at Church Studios, and there was a little clip. I think you sent me some photos of that, or Fat Pop as well. But actually, I think it's in the making of. There's a little clip of you, and there's no real brief for your work on Sunset, from what I can understand. It's just cinematic sounding, more violins. Go for it. So talk me through On Sunset and how you worked on that one.
That was basically it.
Oh, really? Was that the brief?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just like, go for it. We want big summer fun. And that was it. Like, and so I went away, and yeah, like what I said earlier, like I'd heard the demo kind of mixes in the studio, or half mixes in the studio. And you get a vibe that actually, like, for me, it felt like a Beach Boys type of vibe, or like that classic sound where all the strings are doing the same melody at once, and there's not much kind of complicated layering or anything. You just need a big thing to kind of hook yourself onto. And so that's what I offered, and that's what went on the record. So that's why I love working with Paul, because there's no kind of complications to stuff. Like, I've worked with some artists where it's like, no, another try, no, another thing. And he's just like, yeah, I love what you do. Great. And I think that's amazing. I shouldn't also forget that Stan is like a massive part of these records as well. Like he is, you know, sat in those sessions, and when we're doing the strings, he's at the back kind of like going, right, can we do that one again? And, you know, it's not just Paul and me. There is like a whole amazing team of people. Fat
Pop Volume 1 arrives in May. Was this something you had to work on remotely? Because I know he was recording things and on a click track, which every time I hear him mention that, I mean to Google a click track to see what the bloody hell he's on about, because I have no idea what that means. But he was recording stuff and sending it to you to send stuff back, or did you manage to get into an actual studio on that one?
No, for Fat Pop, actually, we did that in the summer of 2020. So that was the first time I came across. I didn't do it remotely. A lot of the band did, but that was the first time I'd seen everybody and seen people, more than like 2 people in my garden or whatever. And I was really freaked out about it, actually, because it felt so weird. And the first thing when I got there, Paul just gave me a big hug. And I was like, I kind of went, like, why are you hugging me? I don't want to, if I have something, I don't want to give it to you. So
yeah, you don't want to be the one who gives it to Weller, do you?
No. So I felt really awkward about that. And then it was a really hot day. It was like 29 degrees, and there was no windows open in the church because of obvious reasons for recording. And oh my God, it was so crazy hot. I remember I had to take a break halfway through because I was like, I can't deal with this. This is too much. Like seeing, like, you know, it was about 40 people in one day in a 30-degree heat. And
imagine like sensory overload as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a bit of a breather halfway through the session, but it was really good. And again, very much like a really fun session. Like there wasn't anything it was just like big strings, really like this type of tune. Yeah, it was good.
I mean, the thing that I found when that album landed, and we'd had a couple of preview singles and things, but you kind of go 40 years on with he's writing songs like Glad Times and Cobweb Connections, which I know your work's on, and That Pleasure, the song that's a reaction to Black Lives Matters, and even the deluxe album, there's a track, Serafina, which I think you worked on as well, yeah, which is beautiful. Yeah. You're like still producing this amount of material that's right up there with his very best. It's incredible.
Yeah, the amount of material he has is insane. Like on every record, there is always, like, whenever you go into the studio, there's always a list at the back of all the tracks, and there's always way too much more than an album. Like it's they're having to pick. But I guess that's what makes his music so good, because you're overwriting and then you get the best pick of the bunch in the end. And if it doesn't work, I'm pretty much guessing that he does recycle other things and put them towards the next one. So amazing. Like, to have someone like that is living and you can talk to and learn off and be inspired by is such a gift, because you don't really get that a lot from other artists, older artists.
And it must be lovely seeing the album out there. There you are, your credits are on a Paul Weller album. That must be a brilliant feeling too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah. I hope he still works with me now.
After the podcast, I should ask you two things as well before we wrap up. One was the Declan O'Rourke album, which again was a connection through Paul Weller. So Paul produced this brilliant album which is called Arrivals, which again came out earlier this year. Paul produced and created that with Declan, but you did all the string arrangements on that as well, right? Yeah,
that was another great one. And the beautiful string players from Demon Strings as well. And he's really good at putting my name forward for other things and saying, get Hannah to do it. And I really appreciate that, because it's not my main thing that I'm known for. It's a side thing that I love doing, but I don't get the opportunity and I don't promote myself. So when he comes along and says there's someone called Declan O'Rourke, and I'm like, oh, I've heard of Declan. And, since then I've become friends with Declan and done some other things for him as well. So yeah, that was a great record to do. And again, another summertime recording. Yeah. So it's always a good memory of like being outside and recording in the sun. And yeah, it's lovely. It was a good record that to record. And also like you were talking about click tracks and things, and Declan doesn't record to a click, like a solid BPM. He records very naturally. So there was a massive element of scoring all the strings to something that shifts all the time in tempo, and that in itself can be quite a challenge if you want to kind of give somebody a demo of what it's going to sound like. But he's a great artist.
Oh, he's brilliant. And I've seen him live a few times. I'm looking for, he's coming over to London in beginning of November to tour that album. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that live. It's going to be great. It'll be brilliant. I had to ask you as well about Para Orchestra. So this was the other thing I wanted to touch on, which I think you worked on Sunset. That was the other strings orchestra that you worked on Sunset. Would that be right?
Yeah. And actually, just before we go on to that, Paul actually put me in touch as well with Dot Allison, and her record that just came out a month ago, that came through Paul as well. And I did I think 4 or 5 tracks of strings for her.
Yes, of course. How could I skip over that? Heart-Shaped Scars, the album. Dot Allison's new one that came out this year, which is brilliant. And of course, they worked together, didn't they? About been about 10 years ago. Co-write a song on Dot's album, Love's Got Me Crazy, the song. They co-wrote together and duetted. She's brilliant. I love Dot Allison. Great that he's kind of putting you out there and making, like, he's almost like your agent.
He is. And, Dot has worked with him. Yeah, we co-wrote, and then also she recorded, I think, a record in Blackburn. He just gave her the studio for free for a couple of weeks, which he does quite a lot if it's not in use for people. And Para Orchestra, I got Paul quite a lot of different quotes of different orchestras when we were looking to record on Sunset, and we all came to the conclusion, I was like, Para Orchestra, they're incredible. They bring in session players. It's they're amazing to work with, and so we got them on board, and we did it again for Fat Pop as well.
The story continues with them because they're part of your next project. Like I said about spinning plates at the beginning, you never stop. This is the unfolding. So this is your next piece of work. This is an album and a live gig, or? So
Para Orchestra, it's all connected. Everything's connected. But Para Orchestra commissioned me to write them a piece 3 years ago. Over 3.5 years ago. And I was so busy with like Paul and Game of Thrones and things, I just had to keep putting it back until lockdown. And then once Furwave had kind of been done, I was just writing away, and I managed to get this commission done for them. And it ended up kind of just being over an hour of music. We were like, we'll do a show in October 2020. And then it was like, no, we're not going to be doing that. And then it was kind of like, well, why don't we do one for the spring in 21? And then I was like, look, you've never made a record before. Why don't we make this as an album? And so we went into that process of finding somewhere to do it, how we fund that, because there's such a unique orchestra. There's so many different elements to each player that is in that orchestra, and safety as well. Like they're quite vulnerable as well with health. So yeah, eventually we made this recording in actually the week that Furwave came out, I was in the studio the whole week recording The Unfolding. It'll come out as an album in 2022. So yeah, we've got a live show in Bristol on the 1st of October, and that's our first show. And that was kind of like a preview or a test run of all the music to see if it's all working. But yeah, I can't wait. It'll be really exciting.
Brilliant. Well, look, I'm really excited about what the future holds. I love the fact that every time a new project's announced, we know that we're going to get something completely different from what's come before from yourself. But also that's very true of Paul as well. And I love that kind of influence on it all too. But I have two final questions for you, Hannah, before you go. One of them, you're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which one's it going to be?
Wow. I do think... I don't know. It's a toss-up between Private Hell and You Do Something to Me. You Do Something to Me because of the connection to that was my first song, so that I probably will choose that one. But Private Hell was just so much fun to do live and play, and I loved it. It was so good. Yeah, I'm going to go with Private Hell.
Yeah, that stands out. I have to say that one on the live album that we talked about, that you orchestrated and conducted. That's so clever. I mean, it's such a bleak lyric that if you read the lyric sheet for that, isn't it? It's like my God, honestly. And this is a song from 1979 from Setting Suns from the Jam. And I think Steve Craddock said on the documentary, the work that you did on that, it sounds so current. That sounds like a song that is right now, but it's so dramatic, isn't it? It's like, whoa.
Oh, that was so much fun. Yeah. I guess when you don't have a connection, those songs are very precious to a lot of people, and including yourself. And there's definitely an element of like, oh my God, am I going to do the right thing by it? But then also I was like, well, I've got no connection to this song. I'm just going to make it how I think it should be as a live show, and how that's going to feel live, and forget about all the kind of the pressure of like honoring what other people like and want. And so that's the approach I took to all of those older songs. I mean, he wrote that when he was so young. Like the Jam, you totally forget how young he was. Like it's just, it's amazing. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that was like his late teens. He was like 19, 20, 21, something like that, I think. Okay, final question. So the purpose of this podcast is not least to talk to amazing people like yourself, but it's also to get the interview with Paul Weller that I never managed in my radio career. If it happens, what should I talk to him about? Is there anything you think I should ask him, or any topic you think would go down well in conversation?
Bowie, massive Bowie fan, massive Beatles fan. I think like anything to do with that, if he's ever met them or what he would say to them or ask them. I think that would be a good conversation starter for sure. I hope you get it.
Well, bless you. Well, bless you, Hannah. Hey, look, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it, because like I say, you are ridiculously busy. There's no doubt about 20 projects that we haven't talked about that you're working on at the moment with all those plates spinning, right? You're nodding. But this has been so brilliant. So thank you so much for your time, Hannah.
Oh, you're very welcome. No, it's amazing, your knowledge, what you've done, like research. You knew everything. I was like, what? I knew what as well. Thank you for having me.
Wow. What another amazing guest. An absolute joy. My thanks once again to the Robert De Niro of the music world, Hannah Peel. Such an inspiring and talented individual doing some amazing things right now. A real talent. So do dive into my show notes to discover more about Hannah's work. Now, coming soon on the podcast, we'll be hearing from Dylan Jones, some superfans known as the Jam Tarts, broadcaster John Wilson, author David Lyons, and musicians Saku Keita and Kamel Hines, to name a few of my very special guests. Make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, you can buy me a coffee, and find information about my guests in the show notes. Get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod, or on Instagram and Facebook, it's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.